Picture this, a grown man is literally hiding in a ditch, beating grain like he's trying to hide evidence of a crime, jumping at every sound, looking over his shoulder every 5 seconds. And an angel shows up and calls him mighty warrior. The guy looks around like, who, me? Bro, are you blind? I'm in a hole right now. I'm literally doing farm work in the worst possible location because I'm scared someone's gonna see me. Mighty warrior. I'm a mighty coward. But here's what's insane, God wasn't describing who Gideon was. He was declaring who Gideon was about to become. And that moment, that disconnect between what Gideon saw in the mirror and what God saw in him, that's the entire story. Because this isn't just about some ancient guy who got lucky. This is about what happens when the most unqualified person in the room gets chosen for the most impossible mission. This is about what happens when God looks at your resume, throws it in the trash, and says, actually, your weakness is exactly what I'm looking for. Gideon's story has betrayal, supernatural encounters, impossible odds, a battle strategy that sounds completely insane, enemies literally killing each other in confusion, and a victory so ridiculous that the only explanation is divine intervention. But more than that, if you've ever felt like everyone else got the memo on how to do life except you, if you've ever wondered why God would choose literally anyone but you, if you've ever been crippled by the gap between where you are and where you want to be, this story might be the most important thing you hear today. Because what happened to Gideon in that winepress might be happening to you right now in your bedroom, your car, your office, wherever you're watching this, and you have absolutely no idea that your breakdown is about to become your breakthrough. Okay, so let me set the scene because you need to understand just how bad things were. Israel is getting absolutely demolished. Not like, oh, we're having a tough year financially, demolished. We're talking full scale, wake up screaming from nightmares, hide in caves like animals demolished. Every single year. The Midianites would show up like it was Black Friday and Israel was the store. They'd roll in with their camels, and the Bible says their camels were so many they couldn't be counted. Imagine seeing a literal sea of camels on the horizon. That's not an army, that's an apocalypse. They'd take everything. Your crops. Gone. Your animals. Gone. That family heirloom your grandmother gave you. Gone. They'd strip the land so clean that people were literally starving in their own country. In the land God gave them. The land that was supposed to be flowing with milk and honey was now flowing with nothing. Because the Midianites took it all. And this wasn't a one-time thing. 7 years of this. Do the math. That's 2,555 days of oppression. That's 84 months of trauma. That's long enough for a baby to be born, learn to walk, learn to talk, and their first memories being hide or die. Kids growing up thinking poverty is normal. Teenagers who've never known peace. Adults who've forgotten what hope feels like. The Israelites were living in caves. Caves. They went from having homes and farms and communities to literally living like animals in the mountains because they were too terrified to stay in their own houses. Can you imagine that level of fear? Going to bed every night wondering if tonight's the night they come. Waking up every morning wondering if today's the day you lose everything. And here's the kicker, this was their own fault. The Bible straight up says Israel turned away from God. They started worshipping Baal and Asherah, these false gods of the people around them. They basically told God, thanks but no thanks, we're gonna do our own thing now. And God said, alright. You want to see what life looks like without my protection? You want to see what happens when you trust in your own strength and other gods? Let's find out. And it went terribly. But here's what gets me, even though they rejected him, even though this entire nightmare was a consequence of their own choices, when they finally hit rock bottom and cried out, God, we can't do this anymore, we need you. He didn't say, I told you so. He didn't ignore them. He didn't make them grovel. He sent help. He sent the most unlikely hero you could imagine. Now, when God needs someone to deliver Israel, you'd expect him to choose someone impressive, right? Someone from a royal family. Someone with military training. Someone who's been preparing for this their whole life. Someone who at least looks the part. Instead, God picks Gideon. Who is Gideon? Great question. Nobody knows. Because he's nobody. He's not a prince. He's not a warrior. He's not a prophet. He's literally just some farmer from the weakest clan in his tribe, and he's the least important person in his already unimportant family. In modern terms, Gideon's the guy who barely graduated high school, whose family is known for nothing, who works a dead-end job, who's never accomplished anything notable, who has zero connections, zero resources, zero qualifications. That's who God picks. And when we first meet Gideon, it somehow gets worse. He's threshing wheat in a winepress. Now, if you're not familiar with ancient agriculture, let me explain why this is absolutely ridiculous. Wheat is supposed to be threshed on a hilltop where there's wind to separate the grain from the chaff. The wind blows away the light chaff and the heavy grain falls down. Simple. Effective. That's how everyone does it. A winepress is a low, enclosed pit where you crush grapes to make wine. There's no wean down there. It's literally the worst possible place to thresh wheat. It's like trying to dry your clothes in a swimming pool. It makes no sense. But Gideon's doing it because he's hiding. He's so terrified the Midianites will see him and steal his wheat that he's down in this pit, probably overheating, definitely frustrated because it's not working properly, absolutely exhausted, feeling like a complete and total failure. And that's when heaven invades earth. The angel of the Lord appears and says, "And I need you to really hear this, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Gideon stops what he's doing. Looks up. Looks around to see who the angel is talking to. Realizes there's nobody else there. Looks back at the angel like, "Are you serious right now?" And what Gideon says next is so real it hurts. He doesn't go, "Oh, praise the Lord, thank you for this word." He doesn't get all religious and fake humble. He basically says, "Okay, if the Lord is with us, then why is all this horrible stuff happening? Our parents told us stories about God doing miracles, parting seas, bringing down walls, defeating giants. Where's that God? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like he forgot about us. It looks like he abandoned us. It looks like he handed us over to our enemies and walked away." Can we just pause and appreciate how brutally honest that is? Gideon's hurting. He's confused. He's angry. He feels forgotten. And he doesn't hide it behind religious language. He just says it. And you know what God does? He doesn't get offended. He doesn't smite Gideon for questioning him. He doesn't give him a lecture about faith. Instead, God says something that changes everything. "Go in the strength you have and save Israel. Am I not sending you?" Read that again slowly. Go in the strength you have. Not, go get stronger first. Not, go train for a decade. Not, go find someone to help you. Not, go become a different person. Go. Right now. As you are. In the strength you already have. But Gideon's brain is short-circuiting. He's like, "Excuse me, but my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the least important person in my family. How exactly am I supposed to save Israel?" That's like asking a goldfish to climb a mountain. He's basically saying, "You've got the wrong address. This can't be for me. There are thousands of better options. Pick literally anyone else." And haven't you felt exactly like that? Haven't you looked at what you feel called to do and thought, "That's not for me"? That's for people who have their life together. That's for people with education, with connections, with confidence, with money, with talent, with something. I don't have any of those things. I'm not qualified. I'm not ready. I'm not enough. That's precisely where Gideon is. He's standing in the gap between the call and the belief. Between hearing what could be and feeling like it's impossible. Between God's vision and his reality. And most people never leave that gap. They stay there forever, convinced they're not enough, waiting to become someone different before they step forward. But Gideon? He's about to learn something that will blow his mind. So God's telling Gideon he's going to save an entire nation, and Gideon's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna need receipts." And honestly, I love this about Gideon. He's not super spiritual. He doesn't have blind faith. He's not like, "Yes, Lord, I'll go immediately with no questions asked." He's skeptical. He's cautious. He's like, "If this is really you, I need proof because I'm not about to make a fool of myself based on what might be a really vivid daydream." So Gideon says, "If I've found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it's really you talking to me." And please don't leave until I come back with an offering. And God, the creator of the universe, who has infinite things he could be doing, waits. Gideon goes and prepares food. He cooks a young goat. He makes some bread. He comes back and puts it on a rock. The angel of the Lord reaches out with his staff, touches the offering, and boom, fire blazes up from the rock and completely consumes everything. The meat, the bread, all of it. Gone in seconds. And then the angel vanishes. Gideon freaks out. He's like, oh no. Oh no. I just saw the angel of the Lord face to face. I'm about to die. Because back in those days, there was this understanding that if you saw God directly, you couldn't survive it. Moses asked to see God's glory and God said, you can't see my face, or you'll die. So Gideon's thinking his life is over. But God speaks to him, peace. Don't be afraid. You're not going to die. So Gideon builds an altar right there and calls it Yahweh Shalom, the Lord is peace. Now, you'd think after an experience like that, Gideon would be ready to run through a brick wall for God, right? He's seen an angel. He's seen fire come down from heaven. He's had a direct, supernatural, undeniable encounter with God himself. Nope. That very same night, God gives Gideon his first assignment. And it's not, go fight Midian. It's not even close. God says, take your father's second bull, the one that's 7 years old. Use it to pull down your father's altar to Baal. Cut down the Asherah pole beside it. Then build a proper altar to me on this high ground, and sacrifice the bull. Okay, pause. This is massive. God's not sending Gideon to fight the external enemy yet. First, he's telling him to deal with the internal enemy. The idolatry. The false worship. The reason Israel lost God's protection in the first place. And it's not just anyone's altar. It's his father's altar. This is Gideon's own family worshipping false gods. So God's basically saying, before you can save Israel, you need to clean your own house. Before you can lead others, you need to obey me even when it costs you something personally. Even when it's awkward. Even when your own family might turn against you. And Gideon does it. But he does it at night. Let me say that again. Gideon, the mighty warrior, the guy God just called to save Israel, obeys God, but he does it under the cover of darkness because he's terrified of what people will think. He takes 10 servants with him, they tear down Baal's altar, they cut down the Asherah pole, they build a new altar to God, they sacrifice the bull. All at night. When nobody can see. The next morning, the whole town wakes up and loses their minds. Their altar to Baal is destroyed. The Asherah pole is chopped down. There's a new altar to the Lord. Someone made a sacrifice on it. They investigate. They find out it was Gideon. And they want to kill him. They literally go to Gideon's father Joash and say, bring out your son. He must die. He destroyed our altar to Baal. Now here's where it gets interesting. Joash, Gideon's dad, whose altar just got destroyed, defends his son. He says, are you going to plead Baal's case? Are you trying to save Baal? If Baal really is a god, he can defend himself when someone tears down his altar. That's such a mic drop moment. Joash is basically saying, if your God is so powerful, why does he need you to fight his battles? If he's really a god, let him deal with Gideon himself. And nobody has a response to that. So Gideon survives. But from that day on, everyone calls him Jerubbaal, which means, let Baal contend with him. It's not exactly a compliment. It's like a nickname that reminds everyone, this is the guy who disrespected our God. Now at this point, Gideon's had multiple confirmations. Angel appearance. Fire from heaven. Successfully confronting idolatry and surviving. You'd really think he'd be confident now, right? Then the Midianites and Amalekites and all the armies from the east gather together. They cross the Jordan River and camp in the valley of Jezreel, ready to raid Israel again. And the Spirit of the Lord comes upon Gideon. He blows a trumpet, rallying his clan to follow him. He sends messengers throughout Manasseh, and they gather to him. He sends messengers to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they come up to meet him. Gideon's got an army forming. Things are happening. This is it. And he's terrified. So he goes back to God and says, God, if you're really going to save Israel through me like you promised, I'm going to put a wool fleece on the threshing floor tonight. If in the morning there's dew only on the fleece and all the ground around it is dry, then I'll know you're going to save Israel through me. The next morning, Gideon wakes up early. He goes to check the fleece. He picks it up and squeezes it, and he wrings out a bowl full of water. The fleece is soaking wet. The ground all around it, bone dry. That should be enough, right? Gideon says, God, please don't be angry with me, but let me make one more test. This time, make the fleece dry and let the ground be covered with dew. And God does it. The next morning, the fleece is completely dry, and the ground is soaked with dew. Now, some people criticize Gideon for this. They say he lacked faith. They say he should have believed after the first sign. But I think God understands that sometimes we need reassurance. Sometimes we need to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that we're not making a massive mistake. That we're not about to lead people off a cliff. That God is really in this. And He's patient enough to give us that confirmation. Because think about what God was asking Gideon to do. Go up against an army that the Bible describes as thick as locusts, with camels that could not be counted. An army so massive that just looking at them would make you want to quit. And Gideon's supposed to fight them with a bunch of farmers and shepherds who've never seen real combat. Of course he needed reassurance. The fleece wasn't about doubt. It was about making sure he wasn't about to get a lot of people killed based on wishful thinking. So Gideon finally has his army assembled at the spring of Herod. 32,000 men. Now, that's not a huge army compared to what they're facing, but it's something. It's respectable. They could work with that. Gideon's probably thinking, okay, we're outnumbered, but maybe with the element of surprise, a solid strategy, some divine help, we could pull this off. And then God drops a bomb. You have too many men. Gideon's like, I'm sorry, what? Did you just say we have too many? Because from where I'm standing, we don't have enough. God says, I can't let you defeat Midian with this many soldiers because then Israel will boast and say, our own strength saved us. Tell everyone who's scared to leave. So Gideon makes the announcement. Anyone who's trembling with fear can go home. And 22,000 men leave. Let that sink in. More than 2/3 of his army just walks away. Gideon watches 22,000 men turn around and head home. He's left with 10,000 soldiers. Against an army that's described as innumerable. The odds just went from bad to mathematically impossible. And God says, there are still too many. At this point, Gideon's probably thinking, are you actually kidding me right now? God tells him, take the men down to the water. I'm going to separate them for you there. Watch how they drink. So Gideon takes the 10,000 men down to the water. Most of them get down on their knees and put their faces in the water to drink, completely vulnerable, completely unaware of their surroundings. But 300 men lap the water with their hands, bringing it to their mouths while staying alert, watching for danger, ready to react. And God says, with these 300 men, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let everyone else go home. 300 men. Out of 32,000. That's 0.9%. Less than 1% of the army he started with. Gideon just watched his army get reduced by 99.1%. And here's what God is doing. He's removing every possible explanation except divine intervention. He's making sure that when Israel wins this battle, there's zero question about who gets the credit. Because if they won with 32,000 men, people would debate it. Well, maybe Gideon's just a really good strategist. Maybe they got lucky. Maybe the Midianites made mistakes. But 300 men against an uncountable army? There's only one explanation. Sometimes God strips away everything you're depending on, your money, your connections, your plan B, your safety net, your logical solutions, not because He's cruel, but because He wants you to see what He can do when it's clearly Him doing it. He removes your backup plan so you stop backing up and start trusting Him. But here's what I love, God knows Gideon is scared. The Bible literally says, during that night the Lord said to Gideon, get up, go down against the camp, because I'm going to give it into your hands. But if you're afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they're saying. Afterward, you'll be encouraged to attack. God gives him an out. He basically says, I know you're scared. So before you attack, go spy on the enemy. Listen to what they're saying. It'll give you courage. So Gideon and his servant Purah sneaked down to the outskirts of the Midianite camp. And remember, this camp is massive. Soldiers everywhere. Tents everywhere. Camels everywhere. It stretches as far as the eye can see. It's overwhelming. They get close enough to hear two soldiers talking. They're changing guard shifts, half asleep, having a conversation. One soldier says to the other, "I had the strangest dream. A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into our camp. It struck a tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed." And his friend interprets it, "This can only be the sword of Gideon son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands." When Gideon hears this, he worships. Right there. On enemy territory. He bows down and worships God. Because the enemy is afraid of him. The enemy is having nightmares about him. The enemy already believes they're going to lose. Think about that. While Gideon's thinking, "How am I supposed to win?" the Midianites are thinking, "How are we supposed to survive Gideon?" While Gideon's focused on his own fear, they're focused on their fear of him. Sometimes you need to hear what your enemies are saying about you. Sometimes you need to know that the giants you're terrified of are actually terrified of you. Gideon goes back to his camp with completely different energy. He shouts, "Get up. The Lord has given the Midianite camp into your hands." Okay, now we get to the absolutely wild part. Gideon divides his 300 men into 3 companies of 100 each. And he gives each man 3 things. A trumpet. An empty jar. A torch. That's it. No swords. No spears. No shields. No armor. No actual weapons. Trumpets. Jars. Torches. Imagine being one of those 300 men. You've watched 31,700 soldiers go home. You're about to face an army that outnumbers you probably 400 to 1. And your commander hands you a musical instrument, an empty container, and a stick on fire. You'd be like, Gideon? Sir. Where are the actual weapons? But Gideon's like, "Watch me. Do exactly what I do. When I blow my trumpet, you blow yours. When I shout, you shout. Trust me." They position themselves around the camp. 3 groups of 100, surrounding the Midianites on 3 sides. It's the middle watch of the night, around midnight. The Midianites just changed guard shifts, so everyone's settling in, half asleep, letting their guard down. Everything's quiet. Everything's still. And then, at Gideon's signal, all 300 men blow their trumpets at the same time. All 300 men smash their jars at the same time. All 300 torches blaze to life at the same time. And all 300 voices shout at the same time, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." Now imagine you're a Midianite soldier. You're exhausted. You just fell asleep. Suddenly you hear 300 trumpets blaring from every direction. You see 300 torches blazing in the darkness, surrounding your camp. You hear 300 men shouting battle cries. Your first thought isn't, "Oh, it's only 300 men with trumpets." Your first thought is, "We're surrounded by a massive army." Because in ancient warfare, trumpet blasts signaled large military divisions. One trumpet meant hundreds of soldiers. The Midianites are hearing 300 trumpets from 3 different directions. They think they're being attacked by thousands of men. Maybe tens of thousands. Panic. Chaos. Confusion. Soldiers jumping out of tents. Grabbing weapons. Spinning around trying to figure out where the attack is coming from. Can't see clearly in the darkness. Can only see torches surrounding them. And here's the key detail that makes this story absolutely insane. The Bible says, the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other with their swords. They start killing each other. In the chaos and darkness and confusion, they can't tell who's friend and who's enemy. They're swinging at shadows. They're attacking their own people. God didn't need Gideon's men to fight. He just needed them to show up, make noise, and hold their light. And he did the rest. The Midianites who don't get killed in the friendly fire chaos run. They flee for their lives. And the Israelites from other tribes joined the pursuit and chased them down. Gideon's 300 men, armed with nothing but trumpets and torches, just defeated an army that couldn't be counted. Not because they were strong. Not because they had better weapons. Not because they used brilliant military tactics. But because God fought for them. Let me break down why this strategy worked on a psychological level, because it's genius. The element of surprise, attacking at midnight when everyone's vulnerable. Psychological warfare, the trumpets and lights made them think they were facing a massive army. Surrounding them, attacking from 3 directions created the impression of being vastly outnumbered. The shout, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon," planted the idea that this was the guy from their nightmares. Chaos breeds chaos. Once panic started, it spread like wildfire. But here's what's deeper. Gideon's 300 men had to believe it would work. They had to trust that showing up with trumpets and torches was enough. They had to override their logical brains that were screaming, "This makes no sense." They had to do something that looked ridiculous from the outside. And that's faith. Real faith isn't believing God will make sense. It's obeying God even when it doesn't make sense. So Israel wins this impossible victory. The Midianites are defeated. The oppression is over. Peace comes to the land. And the Israelites are so grateful, so impressed with Gideon, that they come to him and say, "Rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson, because you saved us from the hand of Midian." They want to make him king. They want to establish a dynasty. The Gideon dynasty. And Gideon says something beautiful. "I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." He doesn't take the credit. He doesn't let the victory inflate his ego. He doesn't start believing his own hype. He points them back to God. This is massive because Gideon could have easily let this moment define him. He went from hiding in a winepress to being a national hero. From being called a coward to being called a deliverer. He could have built his entire identity around being Gideon the mighty warrior. He could have started believing that he really was special, that he really did have what it took all along. But he doesn't. He remembers who gets the glory. And that's beautiful. But, and here's where we have to be real, Gideon's not perfect. Later in the story, Gideon makes an ephod, this priestly garment, out of gold. He puts it in his town, Ophrah. And the Bible says, all Israel prostituted themselves by worshipping it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family. Even after everything. Even after seeing God work miracles. Even after the victory. Even after refusing to be king. Gideon still messes up. He creates something that becomes an idol. Something that leads people away from God instead of toward him. And I think that's important to note because we have this tendency to think that once God uses us, once we have our breakthrough, once we see our victory, we've arrived. We're done. We've figured it all out. We won't struggle anymore. But that's not reality. The truth is, we're all still works in progress. We all still have areas where we're vulnerable. We all still need God's grace every single day. Gideon's story doesn't end perfectly tied up with a bow on top. It ends messily. Realistically. Humanly. He had a massive victory and he made mistakes after. Both things are true. And maybe that's actually encouraging. Because it means you don't have to be perfect to be used by God. You don't have to have it all together. You don't have to never mess up again. You just have to keep saying yes when he calls. Keep showing up. Keep trusting him even when you're scared. The land had peace for 40 years because of what Gideon did. An entire generation grew up without the oppression their parents experienced. Kids who were born after Gideon's victory never knew what it was like to hide in caves. Never knew what it was like to starve because raiders took everything. One person's obedience, even imperfect obedience, changed the trajectory of an entire nation for decades. Here's what I need you to understand, and I mean really understand. You might be in your winepress right now. You might be in that hidden place, doing what you need to do to survive, feeling like a failure, feeling like everyone else has life figured out except you, feeling like you're falling behind while everyone else is moving forward. And you think that disqualifies you. You think God's looking for someone stronger. Someone braver. Someone from a better family. Someone with more money. Someone with better connections. Someone with fewer mistakes. Someone with less baggage. Someone who doesn't doubt as much as you do. Someone who doesn't struggle with the things you struggle with. But what if, and I need you to really sit with this, what if the place where you're hiding is exactly where God wants to meet you? What if your weakness isn't a disqualification, but an invitation? What if your doubt doesn't make you unusable, it makes you honest? See, God didn't call Gideon a mighty warrior because of what Gideon could see when he looked in the mirror. He called him that because of what God could see. Because of what God was about to do. Because of the story God was about to write. And when God looks at you, He doesn't see your current circumstances. He doesn't see your bank account or your resume or your relationship status or your GPA or your follower count or your mistakes. He sees your potential. He sees what you're becoming. He sees the story He's writing. You know what's crazy? Gideon never stopped being afraid. After the angel appeared, still scared. After the fire came down, still scared. After God reduced his army, definitely still scared. After he heard the enemy's dream, still scared. The fear never went away. But he moved forward anyway. And that's courage. Real courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is being scared out of your mind and doing it anyway. Maybe you've been waiting to feel brave before you take that step. Maybe you've been waiting to feel confident before you start that business. Maybe you've been waiting to feel worthy before you believe you could actually make a difference. But what if you never feel ready? What if the feelings never come? What if God's waiting for you to move before He gives you the confidence? Gideon asked for signs, and God gave them. Multiple signs. Not because Gideon was weak, but because God is patient. Because God understands that sometimes we need reassurance. So if you need to ask God for confirmation, ask. If you need a sign, seek it. Don't let anyone shame you for needing assurance. God's big enough to handle your questions. Secure enough to handle your doubts. Patient enough to meet you where you are. But here's the thing, after the signs came, Gideon still had to move. After the confirmation, there was still a decision. Still a risk. Still a step. And when God reduced his army from 32,000 to 300, that must have felt like the cruelest joke. Gideon probably thought, finally. Finally I'm ready. I've got my confirmation. I've got my army. I've got my plan. Let's do this. And God said, not like that. Because if Gideon won with 32,000 men, he would have always wondered, was that really God? Or did we just have enough people? But with 300 men, there's only one explanation. Maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe God's stripping away the things you thought you needed. Maybe He's removing your backup plans. Taking away your safety nets. Reducing your resources. Closing doors you thought would stay open. And it feels cruel. It feels like He's setting you up to fail. But what if He's actually setting you up for a testimony? What if He's removing everything else so that when the breakthrough comes, when the victory happens, when the impossible becomes possible, there's zero doubt about who did it? Because here's what happens when God removes all your other options, you discover He's enough. And once you discover that, it changes everything. Gideon and his 300 men didn't fight the battle. They just showed up. They just made noise. They just held their light in the darkness. And God did the rest. What if that's all He's asking you to do? Not to have it all figured out. Not to be perfectly qualified. Not to overcome all your fears first. Not to wait until you feel ready. Just show up. Just be obedient with what He's given you. Just let your light shine right where you are. And watch what He does with that. The enemy's already afraid of you. You just don't know it yet. Those obstacles you're facing, they're having nightmares about what God's about to do through you. That job you don't think you can get. That dream you don't think you can achieve. That healing you don't think you can experience. That freedom you don't think you can walk in. The enemy knows what you're capable of with God. And he's terrified you're going to figure it out. Because you're not who you think you are. You're not defined by your worst moment. You're not limited by your past. You're not disqualified by your doubts. You're not too broken. You're not too messed up. You're not too far behind. You're who God says you are. And he's calling you a mighty warrior while you're still hiding in the winepress. He's calling you chosen while you still feel invisible. He's calling you victorious while you're still in the fight. He's calling you free while you're still bound. Not because he's delusional, but because he sees the end from the beginning. He knows what he's about to do. He knows the story he's writing. And yes, you might mess up along the way. You might make mistakes after your victory. You might create your own efforts that become snares. But that doesn't erase what God did through you. That doesn't negate the breakthrough. That doesn't cancel the testimony. You're a work in progress. And that's okay. God's not done with you yet. I don't know what your winepress looks like. Maybe it's a job that's sucking the life out of you, but you're too scared to leave because at least it pays the bills. Maybe it's a relationship that's breaking you slowly, but you're terrified of being alone so you stay. Maybe it's a dream that's been buried so deep you've almost convinced yourself it was never real, because you've been rejected so many times that hope feels dangerous. Maybe it's an addiction you keep falling back into, and the shame is so heavy you don't even want to try anymore. Maybe it's a calling you feel burning in your chest, but you're paralyzed by your own inadequacy. Maybe you're hiding in plain sight, going through the motions, wearing the mask, pretending everything's fine, but inside you're dying. Inside you're desperate for more. For purpose. For meaning. You know there's something bigger. You know you were made for more than this. But you don't know how to bridge the gap between where you are and where you're supposed to be. I need you to hear this like your life depends on it. Your hiding place can become your meeting place. The lowest point of your life can be the launching point for your destiny. God's not waiting for you to get it together. He's not waiting for you to become someone else. He's not waiting for you to earn it or deserve it or qualify for it. He's meeting you right where you are. And he's calling you something you don't feel like yet. Mighty warrior. World changer. History maker. Beloved. Chosen. Free. I know you want to argue. I know you want to list all the reasons why he's wrong. All the evidence that proves you're not those things. But what if your weakness is the point? What if your insufficiency is exactly what he wants to work with? Because when God shows up in your weakness and does something impossible, nobody can take credit but him. And that's the testimony the world is dying to see. Not another person who had it all together from the start. Not another person who came from privilege and connections. Not another person with natural talent who made it look easy. The world needs to see what God can do with someone who was hiding. With someone who was broken. With someone who was afraid. With someone who felt like nothing. Because that's most of us. Most of us don't feel like mighty warriors. Most of us feel like Gideon in the winepress, scared, inadequate, questioning everything. But what if that's where the story begins? What if this moment, right now, reading these words, feeling what you're feeling, is your angel showing up? What if God's about to ask you to do something that terrifies you? Something you're not qualified for. Something that makes no logical sense. You're going to want to ask for signs. You're going to want reassurance. You're going to want to be sure before you risk everything. So ask. Seek. Make sure. But then. Move. Take the step. Make the decision. Do the thing even though you're scared. Tear down your altars. Face your giants. Blow your trumpet even though you only have 300 when you think you need 30,000. Show up with what you have, not what you wish you had. And watch what God does with your obedience. Because here's the truth that'll wreck you in the best possible way. God's not looking for your ability. He's looking for your availability. He's not looking for your perfection. He's looking for your surrender. He's not looking for your credentials. He's looking for your willingness. And when you say yes, even a scared, trembling, doubt-filled yes, he moves heaven and earth to back you up. You are not too much of a mess for God to use. You are not too broken for God to heal. You are not too far gone for God to redeem. You are not too afraid for God to work through. You are not too weak for God to strengthen. The very thing that makes you feel least qualified might be the thing that makes you most effective. Your story isn't over. This chapter might feel like an ending, but it's actually a beginning. The winepress is where God meets you. But it's not where he leaves you. If this story hit you somewhere deep, if something shifted while you were listening, if you're starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, God's not done writing your story yet, don't keep this to yourself. There's someone in your life right now who needs to hear this. Someone hiding in their own winepress. Someone convinced they're not enough. Someone who needs to know that God specializes in using the least likely person for the most impossible mission. Share this with them. And if you want to keep walking this journey, hit that subscribe button. Not because I need the numbers, but because you might need the reminder. When the next battle comes. When the next doubt creeps in. When you're back in the winepress wondering if God even knows your name. Come back here. Remember Gideon. Remember that God calls things that are not as though they were. Remember that your weakness is not a disqualification, it's an invitation. You are loved. You are called. You are chosen. Even in the winepress. Especially in the winepress. This is where your story begins.